Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new Portfolio Cabinet Member meeting, Place and Community Development, on Tuesday the 13th July 2021 at 1:30 p.m. So we'll start off first with any apologies, Karen?
None received.
Okay. Late items to be introduced by the Chair, there are none. And then 3 declarations of interest. I think there's none from me. So it is moving on to item 4, which is the Public Protection Service Fees and Charges 2021 to 2022. And I believe that's over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. So yes, this is about Public Protection Service amended fees and charges. Now, back in March, a Cabinet Member meeting received a report about our Public Protection Service fees and charges. However, the government have raised the statutory fees for explosives related to fireworks in late April. So that was a few weeks after the resolution was made at the Cabinet Member meeting in March. So what we have had to do is just bring this short report back to you to consider the amended statutory fees and charges for explosives. So the previous report that we brought was set out in Appendix 1. So that was the body of the report, and then a tabulated list of fees and charges. Attached at Appendix 2 are the amended fees and charges that have been highlighted in red. Now, it did set out in the report there at 4.2 that the only difference was a maximum increase of £5. That isn't actually factually correct. So just to clarify, Appendix 2, you'll see the fees and charges that we're talking about are highlighted in red. Depending on whether or not they are for 1 year or for 5 years, there is a bit of a difference in related to the proposed changes. And by my reckoning, I think the highest increase is actually £25 difference, and that relates to the licence to store explosives for a 5-year licence, which goes from 407 to 432. So the main licences that I understand our trading standards team deal with are generally the 1-year licences that are mainly a difference of £5, and I think that was why that line was put into 4.2. But just to be clear, there are higher increases than that, Chair. As it's set out in the report, the fees are set nationally, cannot be changed by the council. You know, they are statutorily set, so every local authority will be charging these across the country. So the recommendation is to approve the amended statutory fees and charges for explosives for 2021 to 2022 as set out in Appendix 2, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mike. Yeah, that's brilliant. Just for the record, can we have the reasoning on the supporting information of 4.2 to change that? The increase of that £5 is obviously an erroneous part of that paper, but if we can get that changed, that would be great. And I am very... is there any questions, Councillor Shiraz Khan? Is there anything you want to add? Not at all, no. Now, as Mike's clearly stated, this is obviously a statutory function that is obviously dictated by central government, and obviously this is the fees that will be set nationally, so obviously this is something that we have to do. So on that basis, on recommendation 2.1, to approve the amended statutory fees and charges for explosives for 2021-2022 as set out in Appendix 2, and I'm happy to pass them. Okay then, so moving on, that takes us on to item 5, which is housing standards, services, fees and charges, and I believe this is now you then, Dawn. Thank you.
It is, Councillor. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So the housing standards fees and charges, this report is regarding our fees and charges that are revised and endorsed annually. I'm asking for a fresh endorsement of these, please. The fees and charges are set to ensure they reflect the cost of delivering the service and take into account inflationary costs. They've only been applied to those items where the council has the discretion to set the fees and charges for the service it provides. The housing standards service fees and charges for the period 2020 to 21 and 21-22 are set out at Appendix 1. And the recommendations, Chair, are to approve the housing standards service fees and charges are set out at Appendix 1, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick clarification for me. So this isn't so much a statutory function in terms of setting charges. This is what we can charge ourselves, and this is what we could. It's in our discretion to say.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So and these do come up. I believe now housing standards moving into my portfolio. This is done yearly. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's
Annually.
right.
That's correct. Councillor Shiraz Khan, is there anything you'd like to add on this one?
No, thank you.
No? Okay then. So on that basis, the recommendation on 2.1 is to approve the housing standards, service fees and charges as set out in Appendix 1, and I'm happy for them to pass. Thank you. Okay then, so moving on to item 6, which is the update of space and amenity standards for houses in multiple occupation. Again, Dawn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So amenities and space standards in HMO. So this report is to update our amenity and space standards for houses in multiple occupation. They were previously endorsed by a Cabinet member in February 2017. The standards are reviewed on a regular basis and amended as circumstances require. And I'm asking for a fresh endorsement of our standards as we have over the years made minor amendments since the original document was prepared. Now, the private rented sector is an important part of our housing market, and with 4.7 million households in England falling into this sector, the sector has undergone rapid growth over the last 10 years, and it's the second largest tenure in England, representing 20% of all households. Housing multiple occupation form a vital part of this sector, often providing cheaper accommodation for people whose housing options are limited. HMOs are known to be commonly occupied by students, but there's also a growing number of young professionals and migrant workers sharing houses and flats. So mandatory licensing of HMOs came into force in 2006 and originally applied to properties of 3 stories or more. As demand for HMOs increased since mandatory licensing was first introduced, there's been a significant increase in properties with fewer than 3 stories being used as HMO accommodation, notably 2-storey houses being originally designed for families and flats. Some have been used by opportune or rogue landlords who exploit their vulnerable tenants and rent substandard, overcrowded and potentially dangerous accommodation. So in April 2018, Parliament introduced the licensing of housing, multiple occupation, open brackets, prescribed description, close bracket, open bracket England, close bracket Order 2018. And this extended the scope of Housing Act 2004 Part 2, so that mandatory HMO licences now also apply to HMO properties where there are less than 3 stories high. The licensing of housing, multiple occupation, open bracket, mandatory conditions of licences, close bracket, open bracket, England, close bracket, regulations 2018, also introduced a new set of regulations setting the minimum standards for bedroom sizes for licensed HMOs, in aim again to prevent statutory overcrowding, again to prevent vulnerable tenants being exploited by opportunist landlords. These regulations introduced mandatory national minimum sleeping room sizes. The standards were set at 6.51 metres for 1 person over 10 years of age and 10.22 metres square for 2 persons over 10 years of age. However, government have endorsed that each local authority can set their own guidance on room size standards. And here at Derby, we've been using a minimum bedroom size of 8 square metres for a single room and 12 square metres for a double room, where there is no cooking in the rooms. These standards also set out the minimum amenity provision in each HMO according to the occupation of the property. And in addition, we are required to impose conditions specifying maximum numbers of persons over 10 years of age and or persons under 10 years of age who may occupy specified rooms provided in HMOs for sleeping accommodation. These standards have been widely accepted by landlords across the city when licensing their HMOs, and full details of these are set out at Appendix 1. We've also produced more specific standards for owners and managers of bread and breakfast type temporary accommodation HMOs. The proposed revised standards have been developed together with staff in housing options and social care, as this is where the referrals are generated from and as a result of increased need in the city for this type of accommodation. It's also to set out standards for family rooms in order to keep family groups together, as we're seeing more and more family groups presenting themselves as needing temporary or emergency accommodation. And full details of these are set out at Appendix 2. So, Chair, the recommendations are to endorse the new space and amenity standards of HMOs contained in Appendices 1 and 2, please.
Thank you very much, Dawn. That is obviously quite a comprehensive report, in particularly the appendices that attach to it. For the benefit of the online, for those online who can watch on YouTube, the appendices obviously detail some very specific information about what we as a local authority are doing to meet good standards of houses of multiple occupation. Incredibly emotive subject across the city, and I'm sure Councillor Shiraz Khan, who's here as chair of planning committee, I think HMOs do come up quite often, don't they, in planning committees, and they are an emotive addition to the public. It is, from my point of view, it is brilliant. It's good news that we set ourselves higher standards than the minimum prescribed by government. I think that's a shining exemplar instead of just doing the bog standard, the bare minimum. I think that is very encouraging. We do know that we do have issues of houses of multiple occupation across the city, and we need to rapidly, as we now come out of the pandemic, where there will be a lot of house movement between the public and, as you say, new tenants going into new properties. So I think this report is very much welcome and much needed, but there is a lot of work to be done in the next 18 months of how we do to combat that. Councillor Shiraz Khan, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you, Councillor.
Can I just ask you, if you want to, can you just use your microphone so it's online? Thank you. Cheers, mate.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smail. Yeah, no, I'd just like to say it's a very good report, and if anything, I would probably have liked to see more separate sort of toilets where 4 or 5 people are living. I don't have anything against HMOs, right, but we must, as an authority, as councillors and officers, ensure that people living in these have a decent standard of living, and that both physically, mentally, you know, they are sort of happy in their surroundings. We don't want small rooms, we don't want inadequate facilities, right? So we pay good money to landlords and we expect good service from them in terms of the standard of living for the people that are there. So yeah, it's a welcome report, and hopefully landlords will look at it and think it's a fair and honest you know, appraisal of how we see people living in our city.
Couldn't agree more with you there, Councillor Shiraz Khan. Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a welcome report, and it does contain some really good detail in there, and I would advise anyone who's online to be able to access our committee's segment on our website to have a look at these, because it will show that the work that will take place in protecting those HMO properties that we do have going forward. So the recommendation on the paper is 2.1 to endorse the new space and amenity standards for HMOs contained in appendices 1 and 2, and I'm happy for them to pass. So that takes us on to the final item, item 7, which is the approval of the electrical safety standards in private rented sector in England, regulations 2020. And hat trick for you, Dawn, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's me again. So this is the approval of the electrical safety standards in the private renter sector, open bracket England, close bracket regulations 2020. And this report is to endorse the use of the new electrical safety regulations and to approve the methodology for determining penalty charges required under these regulations. So these regulations have been approved by Parliament and came into force on the 1st of June 2020. They apply in England to all new specified tenancies from the 1st of July 2020 and all existing specified tenancies from the 1st of April 2020. And to clarify that, a specified tenancy grants one or more persons the right to occupy all or part of the residential premises as their only or main residence and provides for payment of rent for those premises. So they impose a duty on all private landlords of residential premises to ensure at intervals of no more than 5 years that every electrical installation in the premises are tested when the premises are occupied under a tenancy. The purpose of the legislation is to ensure tenant safety. So following an inspection and testing, a duty is placed on the landlord to obtain a report from the person conducting that inspection and test, which gives the results of the inspection and test and the date of the next inspection and test. It also imposes a duty to supply a copy of that report to each existing tenant of the residential premises within 28 days of the inspection and the test. It also implies to supply a copy of that report to the local housing authority within 7 days of receiving a request in writing from that authority. If we then go on and we have reasonable grounds to believe a landlord is in breach of one or more of the duties set out in the regulations, a remedial notice will be served giving the landlord 28 days to rectify this. Where the report indicates urgent remedial action is required, the authority may arrange for a qualified person to take the urgent remedial action, and costs of this are recoverable to the council for this. Now, following failure to comply with the regulations and on the balance of probabilities, which is what's proven in civil law, the council is satisfied that a landlord is in breach, a charge then may be levied following a service of a penalty charge notice. The level of penalty charge is to be determined by the council up to a maximum of £30,000. In determining the civil penalty amount, it's proposed to use the same methodology already approved at the Cabinet member meeting in October 2017, but the penalty charge is set out under the Housing and Planning Act 2016, and full details of these are available at Appendix 1. This methodology considers the seriousness of the failure to comply with the regulations, the harm outcome to the occupiers and any visitors to the dwelling, the most serious harm outcome being death of 80% burns of this failure down to no level of harm outcome for things such as failing to produce a report in 7 days of asking by the council. The culpability of the landlord is determined from being a deliberate act down to low culpability. And using these two factors, a starting figure for the penalty is calculated. Any mitigating or aggravating factors are then considered and the penalty is adjusted accordingly. A step back is then taken to consider whether the financial penalty meets in a fair and proportionate way the objectives of punishment and the removal of gain derived through commission of the breach. And it is said it should not be cheaper to breach than to take the appropriate precautions. On receipt of the penalty notice, the landlord can make representations against the penalty to the council. These representations will be considered at a meeting between the investigating officer, team leader of the Housing Standards team, head of service and a member from legal. On receiving the decision of the review by the council, the landlord may appeal to the first tier tribunal. Decisions made by the first tier tribunal will help develop enforcement of the regulations and inform any review of the statement of principles in determining the amount of the penalty. All penalty charge receipts will be returned to the Housing Standards budget, thereby helping to cover the cost of housing enforcement against rogue landlords. The government have produced guidance on these regulations for local authorities, tenants and landlords, and links to these can be found also in Appendix 1. The approval of this briefing note will give officers in Housing Standards team the legal authority to require landlords to have a certified electrical test completed on the mains wiring of every dwelling they rent. Enforcement of housing standards in the private rental sector contributes to the council's objective of protecting the health, safety and well-being of the public by ensuring safe and decent housing standards. So the recommendations to the Chair today are to endorse the use of the electrical safety standards in the private rental sector, open brackets, England, close bracket, regulations 2020, and to approve the methodology for determining penalty charges required under the electrical safety standards in the private rental sector, open bracket, England, close bracket, regulations 2020, as set out in paragraph 4.5 of this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Yep, another fantastic report that is very detailed and gives some very good insight to what action as we as a local authority can take. I don't think there can be no stone left unturned when it comes to compliance, in particularly electrical standards and safety. So I think this is very much welcome. I think one comment you did make, Dawn, that kind of like rung true to me, which will probably will to a lot of residents, is that the breach should not be cheaper than the fixed penalty notice. You know, we've got to actually show that to any rogue landlords out there who are willing to cut corners on electrical safety, that we are there, that we will be there to prosecute if they are flouting those rules. So I think it's very much another welcomed report. Councillor Khan, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, very briefly, Jonathan, I agree with what you've said, and I think it's a welcome report, and especially if in terms of tenants, did you say it was a 5-year certificate?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's in line with most of the other authorities, and I think responsible landlords will look at this as well and see it as a safety net for them, because it protects them from false and malicious allegations by tenants, etc. So You know, I think overall it's very, very good that we've introduced this, well, it's not something that we want to do, it's something we have to as well, right, in line with other authorities. So, yes, from tenants and landlords' point of view, I think it's a good idea. And as I said, hopefully most responsible landlords will see it as help and not hindrance.
Echo those same words for you, Councillor Khan, that's absolutely right. So based on the recommendations, we have 2 to approve on this one, which is 2.1, 2.2, which is to endorse the use of the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England Regulations 2020, and to approve the methodology for determining penalty charges under the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England Regulations 2020, as set out in paragraph 4.5 of the report, and I'm happy to pass those too. Thank you. I believe that is the end of all of our items, so I can now declare this meeting finished. Thank you very much for all attending.